The world had taken nearly everything from Clara Bennett. Her modest apartment in Willow Creek, a small town nestled in the rolling hills of Northern California, stood as a silent testament to a life unraveled. Bare cupboards mirrored the hollow ache of dreams long faded. Standing in line at the local grocery store, clutching a handful of outdated discount vouchers, Clara could barely meet the cashier's gaze. But instead of dismissing her, the cashier handed her a receipt with a cryptic note scrawled across it, "Return at 8 p.m." It wasn't a promise or a pity offering, it was a faint glimmer of possibility. That night, Clara would learn that hope sometimes arrives from the unlikeliest corners. The Bennett family's home, a small rental on the edge of town, seemed frozen in a state of quiet decay, not from age, but from the weight of hardship. The faded couch, the chipped dining table, the curtains that hung limply at the windows, they all carried the ghosts of better days. Clara, at 38, ran her fingers over the kitchen counter, tracing scratches left by her children's crayons and the faint burns from forgotten hot pans. Those marks were remnants of a life once filled with warmth. Her auburn hair, once vibrant, now hung dull and unkempt, and the faint lines around her eyes told a story of sleepless nights. The only constant was the thin silver band on her finger, a relic of her marriage to Daniel, a promise forged 12 years ago. "Mom, when's dinner?" asked Sophie, her 9-year-old daughter clutching a frayed stuffed rabbit. "Soon, love," replied Clara, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. "We'll have something good." That morning, Clara had sifted through a pile of overdue notices, utility bills, medical expenses, and a lease agreement threatening eviction. Once, she and Daniel had poured their hearts into a small pottery studio, Clay Haven, a cozy shop where they crafted handmade ceramics. Each piece, from mugs to vases, bore their love for the craft. They'd spent long nights at the wheel, laughing as clay splattered their aprons, while Sophie and her younger brother Ethan played nearby, shaping tiny lumps of clay into lopsided animals. A photo on the mantel captured that era. Clara, beaming with pride, holding a glazed blue pitcher. Daniel's arm around her, his grin wide and unshakable. They'd named the studio after their shared dream of creating something lasting. But 2 years ago, disaster struck. A faulty kiln sparked a fire that devoured the studio in hours. The flames left nothing but charred tools and shattered dreams. Their insurance had lapsed, a casualty of a month when every penny went to groceries. The loss wasn't just financial, it was personal. Daniel had hand-built the shelves, chosen every glaze color, and carved their initials into the workbench. The fire took more than their livelihood, it stole their sense of purpose. Debts piled up, suppliers demanded payments, and the family spiraled. They sold their old van to cover a few bills, but it was a fleeting fix. Daniel took odd jobs, delivering packages, painting houses, but the work was inconsistent, barely enough to keep the lights on. "We'll make it through," Daniel would say each morning, his voice a mix of defiance and desperation. But the words grew brittle, and the children began to notice the shrinking portions at dinner. Ethan stopped asking for his favorite fruit snacks. Sophie started splitting her sandwiches, saving half for her brother. Their quiet resilience broke Clara's heart in ways she couldn't voice. That morning, with Daniel out scouring for work, Clara resolved to act. She gathered a stack of expired grocery vouchers, hoping they might stretch far enough for basics: pasta, a few eggs, some canned vegetables. "I'm heading to the store," she told Mrs. Larson, the kind widow next door who watched the kids. "I won't be long." At Willow Creek Market, Clara moved through the aisles with purpose, her eyes darting to price tags. She chose a bag of pasta, the cheapest brand, and a small carton of eggs, checking each one for cracks. For vegetables, she settled on a can of green beans. Practical, affordable. Her worn canvas tote fought heavier than its contents warranted, as if carrying her shame. The market buzzed with life, families with full carts, chatting neighbors. But Clara felt invisible. Her shoulders hunched as she approached the checkout. The cashier, a young woman named Mia, had a warm presence that stood out in the fluorescent-lit store. Her name tag gleamed and her dark eyes held a quiet intensity, as if she saw more than the items on the conveyor belt. Mia, in her mid-20s, scanned Clara's items with care, but when she tried the vouchers, her brow furrowed. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "These expired last month." Clara's cheeks burned. The hum of the store seemed to grow louder, every beep of the scanner a judgment. "I'll put them back," she mumbled, reaching for the items, her hands shaking. But Mia moved quickly, tearing a slip from the receipt printer and scribbling something on it. She folded it and pressed it into Clara's hand with a gentle nod. "Return at 8 p.m., the note read. No explanation, just a small, knowing smile before Mia turned to the next customer. Clara left the store empty-handed, the note burning in her pocket. Was it a mistake? A trick? She walked home, her mind racing. The note felt like a riddle, and she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. At home, the hours dragged. Sophie and Ethan asked about food, and Clara managed a weak smile, heating up the last of their oatmeal with a sprinkle of sugar to mask its blandness. "Maybe something special's coming," she said, her voice catching on the lie. Daniel returned that evening, his face etched with exhaustion. Clara showed him the note, her fingers trembling. "It could be nothing," he said, his tone wary, "or it could be trouble." "I don't think so," Clara replied, squeezing his hand. There was something in her eyes, something kind. At 8 p.m., Clara slipped on her faded green jacket and walked back to the market, the night air sharp against her skin. The streets of Willow Creek were quiet, the glow of streetlights casting long shadows. Mia stood outside, no longer in her uniform, but in a simple sweater and jeans, holding 2 heavy grocery bags. Her face lit up when she saw Clara, as if she had been waiting for this moment. Before Mia could speak, Clara's words tumbled out. She wasn't a beggar, she insisted. The fire had destroyed their pottery studio, their savings, their hope. Daniel was working himself to the bone, and the kids just needed a proper meal. "I don't want pity," she finished, her voice raw. "I just want you to know we're trying." Mia listened, her eyes glistening under the streetlight. A faint scar curved along her jaw, a detail Clara hadn't noticed before. When Clara fell silent, Mia spoke. "I've been carrying this weight for weeks," she said, her voice steady but soft. "A restlessness I couldn't shake. Then last night, I dreamed I gave a woman a bag of pasta, eggs, and green beans. In the dream, it felt like I'd lifted a burden I didn't know I had. When you came through my line today with those exact items, I knew it wasn't chance. It was meant to be." Clara felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the weight of Mia's words. Mia explained she'd paid for the groceries herself, adding more from her own supplies: canned soups, rice, flour, oil, a loaf of bread, and a dozen eggs. She handed Clara the bags, their weight a quiet promise of relief. Clara's eyes welled up. This wasn't just food, it was a lifeline, a reminder that kindness could still exist in a world that felt so cruel. Unbeknownst to them, the store's manager, a woman named Ellen, had watched the exchange from afar. She'd seen Mia pass the note and chose not to intervene, intrigued by the quiet act of compassion. The next morning, she called Mia into her office. "That was something special you did there," Ellen said, offering a small bonus for her kindness. Mia shook her head. "I didn't do it for a reward," she said, her voice firm. "It gave me peace. If you want to help, talk to that family. They don't need handouts. They need a chance." Ellen took Mia's words to heart.
She reached out to Clara and Daniel, learning about their pottery studio and its connection to the community. Years ago, Clay Haven had supplied unique mugs to a local cafe that Ellen's store partnered with. She offered more groceries, but Clara and Daniel asked for work instead. "I can lift, clean, stock, anything," Daniel said, his voice steady with resolve. Ellen made no promises, but picked up the phone. A month later, Daniel started a job at a local warehouse, a steady wool unloading shipments. It wasn't glamorous, but it was reliable. His first paycheck bought a small apple pie, which Sophie and Ethan devoured with wide-eyed joy, savoring each bite like it was a gift. The house began to stir with life again. Clara started making small clay trinkets, keychains, ornaments, selling them at the weekend market. Word spread, and soon she was taking custom orders. With their savings and a small loan, Clara and Daniel rented a tiny workshop. It was a far cry from Clay Haven, but it had room for a wheel, a kiln, and their dreams. They called it New Dawn Ceramics, a nod to the second chance they'd been given. Insurance was the first bill they paid. Mia stayed at the market, but she was different now. She saw her role not just as a job, but as a chance to make a difference. She kept her eyes open for others who needed a small gesture, a smile, a kind word, a bag of groceries. One evening, Clara returned to the store with a gift, a small clay pendant shaped like a star, glazed in deep blue. "For you," she said, her smile bright, "to remind you that a few words can change everything." Years later, New Dawn Ceramics grew into a small but beloved shop in Willow Creek's town square. Clara often shared the story of that night, not as a tale of charity, but as a lesson in listening. She'd say, "Everyone carries pain you can't see. Sometimes a small act, a note, a bag of groceries, can lift not just their burden, but your own."
If you enjoyed this story, please leave a comment below the video with a rating from 1 to 5. Thank you for listening to my channel, and may you find your own moments of kindness in unexpected places.